Welcome to American Medicine Today. I'm alongside my friend Ethan Euchre as we both continue to social distance on American Medicine Today. Now, mental illness can easily shatter even the most loving and secure families. But our next guest has an inspiring message for anyone dealing with a loved one who suffers from depression. Joining us now is Faith McDonald, author of On the Loving End of Crazy, Finding Hope and Help to Face Your Loved One's Crippling Anxiety and Depression. Thank you for being here, Faith.
Thank you for having me.
Your book really caught my eye because of how relatable I really think it is. There's a lot of books out there, memoirs of people who went through depression, anxiety, mental illness, sometimes drug addiction, things like that. We very rarely see the perspective of the family members, specifically the mother. So your story in your book starts with your son, Matt. Can you tell us about him?
Matt, was a happy, active kid growing up, sensitive child, went to college, and the first year of college, things just fell apart for him. He didn't go to class. Stayed in his room. He became very sad, very withdrawn, and just began to fail in life.
And by fail, you mean failing his classes? What was his social behavior? I know I saw you describe it as reckless. What kind of things was he getting into?
My first idea that things were going really wrong were we got a call from the police. He had been arrested for trespassing while intoxicated. And so that was the first of quite a few calls from the police. Other things that happened were he wasn't attending class. He began to fail all his classes, ended up withdrawing from college, then moved home. We had a lot of conflict because, we wanted him to get a job, but he wasn't able to keep a job. Ended up spending a lot of time in his room with the covers over his head saying, leave me alone, but also some alcohol and recreational drug abuse.
Did Matt have a specific goal in mind when he went off to college?
He went to college because I teach at Penn State, and we kind of thought, well, that's what people do. They graduate from high school, go to college. And I thought he would find a direction once he was there. Penn State is a big school. He did not have the tools didn't find the tools that would equip him to succeed.
And how did you react to some of the behaviors that he was exhibiting?
My book, On the Loving End of Crazy, is really about, my reaction and how it took a number of years. Started with me feeling really perplexed, really bewildered. Why can't you do this? To me, understanding that, oh, wow, he struggles with crippling anxiety, crippling depression. And then what does that mean for, me as someone who loves him very much, seeing him floundering and wondering, well, how can I have a happy life when my kid is struggling so much?
I think there's nothing worse as a parent to see something bothering your child that you can't help with. And if they don't have a way to cope, you feel really at a loss. So what did you end up doing?
Over the course of many years, I became more equipped to deal with the struggle. In the beginning, I just felt really embarrassed, perplexed, bewildered, ashamed when we would get the calls from the police, and I kind of withdrew. Interestingly, to me, one day I just broke down in front of a class full of 24 freshmen, stood up in front of the students and just burst into tears. They were all like, yeah, why were you crying? And so I said, well, I have a son who's a little bit older than you. I started to tell the students, what was going on for me. And they were all, probably 10 of them said, oh, I struggle with that too, or my brother went through that. I found support in that classroom that I really needed.
You didn't know it. The students didn't know that, but here you are, essentially an authority figure, the professor teaching a class of new freshman students, and not only are you getting emotional, but you left and came back, and for them, it's almost like the roles were reversed, and they became the counselor asking you, well, you have to tell us what was wrong, what's on your mind. You must have found that sort of cathartic, really, because it is a form of therapy almost.
And just the lesson of learning, wow, when we share what's really hard for us, people will come alongside. Most people will say, well, I struggle with that too, or I know someone who struggles with that. So it was a huge step in the right direction for me to get the help that I needed to live with this struggle.
So why don't you tell us how your son was able to turn things around?
Matt tried college 3 times, tried many jobs, and was not able to hold them down for a number of reasons. Finally, after a long time, I said, well, let's go on a family vacation, thinking that that would help to make things better. Unfortunately, while we were in Colorado, Matt felt suicidal, and he didn't tell us. In retrospect, or afterwards, I said to him, well, why didn't you tell us you were feeling that way? And he said, well, who wants to ruin a vacation by saying they're thinking of killing themselves? And I'm like, well, you think not telling is just was very perplexing, bewildering, very emotional experience. Ended up, my husband was able to get him home from Colorado, and he went to the hospital. He was in the hospital locally for 45 days. And there he got a diagnosis, which we had not had in 7 years. The psychiatrist said that he had anxiety and deep depression, clinical depression leading to a psychotic break, which was why he became suicidal. He actually jumped out of a moving car. Her diagnosis, was again another starting point for us, that we needed to face this, or at least let us know that, there are tools to overcome the challenges that an individual faces who struggles with depression, or people who love that person.
Because obviously there's plenty of empirical evidence that therapy does work, but I know plenty of people who could use therapy who are like, what's talking with somebody going to do?
Matt in the hospital began to participate in group therapy, and when he left, we had a counselor that he was committed to seeing on a regular basis. I myself, my daughter and my niece said to me, well, you've been through a lot of stress. Maybe you should get a counselor. And I was like, well, I don't need a counselor. I have friends to talk to. And they said to me, well, you should try it. And I would have to say I resisted for a while. And we don't understand the value of talking to someone who offers a perspective. And my counselor was excellent. It took me a long time to find her. And possibly that's part of the challenge, finding a counselor who you feel is a good fit. And then they offer you perspective and help you find the tools, again, that you need to live differently or to live a fulfilling life in these challenging circumstances.
So why don't you tell us why it is you wrote the book?
So I wanted people to know that they're not alone, and also to give them hope. Our son was very sick for a long time, but when he got the right help, psychiatric help, psychological help, he has been able to get better. It's not like he still struggles with depression on a daily basis, but he has the tools that he needs to function more adequately. And that's what I wanted to share, that message of hope, and you're not alone in this.
Well, thank you so much, Faith McDonald, author of On the Loving End of Crazy, Finding Hope and Help to Face Your Loved One's Own Crippling Anxiety and Depression. Thank you for taking part in the show and sharing.
Thank you for having me.